Hello, everyone. I'm Marianne Sciucco, author of Blue Hydrangeas and Alzheimer's Love Story, and a co-founder and manager of All's Authors. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. We welcome you to this All's Authors live presentation, Caring for a Wife with Alzheimer's or Dementia. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I'd like to introduce my partner here, Christy Byrne Yates. She and I work together on the podcast and on our YouTube channel, and she's co-moderator and co-host of this event. She's the author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. So caring for a wife with Alzheimer's or dementia brings to caregiving its own special set of circumstances and considerations. In this discussion, we will explore these changes and challenges with three of our authors, all of whom are caring or have cared for their spouse with a dementia diagnosis. Their stories will inspire and empower you on your own dementia journey with your wife or partner. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Richard Creighton, aka Frank Brown, has cared for his wife Kate for 13 and a half years. She is now at stage 7 Alzheimer's and has required total care at home for 3.5 years. Their world is much smaller now, he says, but they still enjoy life and each other. Richard blogs about their Alzheimer's journey at livingwithalzheimers.com. Scott Rose cared for his wife, Maureen, diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, known as FTD, for 3.5 years until her passing in 2019. He shares their love story in his book, We Danced, Our Story of Love and Dementia, a memoir including caregiving tips and mileposts, recounting symptoms and events through real-time journal entries. And last but not least, we have Tio Stib. In January 2013, Tio lost his sight and his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Suddenly, the adventurous life they'd enjoyed became a dramatically different journey. As a way to cope, he began to blog, using prose and poetry to describe their altered path in life. His blog evolved into a book, My Dementia Diary, a blind caregiver's journey with his wife and her dementia. His recounting of their 7-year journey, a story sometimes humorous, often poignant, and always intimate. The story of how a blind man became the sole caregiver for his wife on their dementia journey. You can learn more about our speakers at allsauthors.com. So thank you all for being here. I do want to mention that Tio Stib's screen name is Stephen Miller, in case you haven't figured that out. But we're really pleased to have all of you here today. Each one of you has a very different story to tell. And I'm sure this will be enlightening to many of the members in our audience. So to get started, I wanted to talk about the situation when Alzheimer's first came or dementia first entered the scene, how you might have handled it. How was it seeing your wife and then yourself as well in a new light after this diagnosis? Because as we know, it can change everything. Scott, would you like to start?
Certainly. If I understood you correctly, really just how this came about or how it onset. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you felt about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. My wife, Maureen, started to show symptoms in early 2016 that were, I'll say, broke down her executive functions. Simple things tasks that she would do around the house all of a sudden became very complicated and she'd freeze in place. And initially I thought maybe I was just overreacting, but as the weeks went on, I noticed that there was definitely a pattern almost every day. And the most noticeable thing was I was building a pool for her, and I was inside the pool and putting up the walls, and I'd forgotten to put a chair on the outside to step out onto. And she was looking around the yard and asking me or sitting there and helping me. And then I asked her to bring the chair over. And she saw my work gloves on the chair and she just froze. And I was curious, so I asked her again, could you just bring me over the chair? And she was still frozen. So I asked her, I said, could you take the work gloves? And she did. And I said, why don't you put those on the ground? And she did. And then I said, now why don't you bring over the chair? And she did. But it was that extra step that she was froze at. And So I stepped out on the chair. I gave her a big hug and I said, thank you. We walked inside and sat her down. And right there, I saw that something not only was definitely wrong, but also making her very, very sad. And I sat her down on the couch. I just said, hey, does it feel like something's off? And she said, yeah, maybe. And I said, well, it looks like it makes you sad. Would you like to then maybe go see a doctor? And she said, well, I don't know the doctor could do anything. And at that point, we hadn't even thought about dementia because dementia was not in her family's history. For all I knew, it was an iron deficiency. That's how naive we were about it. And because we had lived particularly the life that we had where she would say, well, let's go to Sicily. And then I would just make all the arrangements. I'd never really understood all the technical components, so she really just wasn't grasping anymore. I didn't ask her what her birthday was, and I knew what her birthday was. But when we went into the doctor's office, that's one of the first things I asked her, your name, your birthday, and she couldn't say it. And it was then that I realized that there was something very dramatically wrong. And my heart sank at that because I thought this is something more than just something that we can easily overcome. And over about 3 months of analysis and tests and the clock drawing test and all the different tests they did, trying to also just test as much about what she didn't have as what she had. It was about 3 months in that we got the diagnosis, and it was frontotemporal dementia, which we'd never heard of before. And I asked the doctor, I said, is this just, sitting there holding my wife's hand as they're giving us this diagnosis. And I said, so is this just something that we just kind of learn to live with? And the doctor said, no, it's going to get progressively worse. She looked at my wife and she said, you have about 7 to 10 years to live. And it was very cold and sudden like that. And I remember my wife's hand just dropping out of mine. And it was a devastating moment.
I can't even imagine. That's so hard. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Richard, could you share your story?
Certainly. Ours is a little bit different. In fact, we came to this with 22 consecutive years of caring for loved ones before Kate's diagnosis. First, it was her father who had a stroke. He passed away 4 months after that stroke. And then it was her mother and my mother. Her mother had several strokes, ended up with vascular dementia, and lived with us with 24/7 care for 5.5 years before her passing. My mother simultaneously had an undiagnosed form of dementia, and she lived here in town with my dad. He was her sole caregiver, but Sarah and I did a lot in the way of helping with to make life easier for them. And then after my mother passed away, my father had a girlfriend, and she had vascular dementia. And so we ended up caring for her. So we had gone through 5 other people, and we had dealt with lots of things. And so I think it affected dramatically how we reacted to it. Now, I'd say despite that, and despite what I'm about to say now, we had seen the signs of dementia with Kate for at least 5 years before we got the diagnosis, at least, and it may have been 7. And at the time, it was things, I just thought she just wasn't living the same way she used to. She wasn't doing things the way she used to. I didn't think of it as directly as memory loss, but she wasn't taking care of getting dinner ready, and that had been her role and not mine. She wasn't cleaning up anything in the kitchen. She just wasn't doing things. It was like things didn't matter. I just thought she was being careless, and I used the word to myself, never to her, but she's just dysfunctional. She very early said, I've got Alzheimer's. And I said, what I think is a natural thing. I said, oh, I wouldn't say that. We're aging. We all have memory problems. I forget things myself sometimes. That's not it. And so ultimately, she was right. And by the time we got the diagnosis, which was about 5 to 6 years later, we knew what the diagnosis was going to be then, and not precisely Alzheimer's, but we knew it was dementia. And yet at the same time, when we heard the words cross the lips of the doctor, it was, I like the word Scott used, devastating, because that meant immediately we had an abrupt change in our lives, that it was going to be forever, that we weren't going to outlive this. And so at that time, we just talked a lot. In fact, the first 2 weeks, we talked a lot about how we felt. When do we tell people? When do we tell the children? And out of all that, we decided, well, my wife especially, Kate, did not want to tell anybody initially. She just wanted to, she didn't want anybody to feel sorry for her. She didn't want people to feel they needed to do something for her. She just wanted to live her life just as she had been living it. And our decision after a couple of weeks was something that we lived by to this very day. And we didn't understand at all that it was a good decision. There was no brilliance in what we did. We just did it. In 2 weeks, we decided we're just going to enjoy life and each other for as long as we have. If it's a year, we're going to have a great year. If it's 2 years, if it's 5 years, if it's more, we never thought about 13 and a half years, which is what it is now. That we'd still be enjoying life in each other, though, as Marianne said earlier, our world is dramatically smaller. We cannot do the things we did before, but within the things we can do, and those two things are going down for ice cream at 3:30 every afternoon to the little cafe downstairs, and going directly from there to dinner at 4:30, having our dinner and getting her in bed by 6:30. And then we do have great evenings. So our relationship remains strong. Our love remains strong. I can't understand much of what she said, hardly anything, but virtually every day we do get smiles. I call them happy moments. We get happy moments every day. And she does say words, and she surprises the caregivers and me all the time. Some of the things she says that make it clear that she understands what we're saying. So she laughs when, we've told a joke to one another and she starts laughing. She picks those things up. So it's made life easier for us because we've just done things we liked. And I could say more later, but I will tell you, we have binged on things like we were into movies, we were into music. Music has been central. I mean, we've gone to more concerts and done everything we could do to listen to music. There's music on right now in the other room where Kate is. I was trying to repair a problem with YouTube today with a technician, and he said something about how much you use it. I said, well, we have it on about 12 hours a day with YouTube music. And I mean, it's been really central. So, but we still live a very joyful life, although a limited life.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Stephen, what is your story?
Yes. As you mentioned, I left a small site in 2013. Well, I had previously lost sight in one eye when we were in Mexico. My wife is Mexican. I was backing the car out and I hit a wall on the opposite side of the alley, and I couldn't figure that out because normally I'm a very conscientious driver. And then I realized I hit the wall because I couldn't see. And so then began this process of depression and shock. I wasn't expecting to lose my sight. And at the same time, looking back, my wife was slowly losing part of her mind. Well, I didn't realize what was happening with her so much because I was trying to adapt to another world, and she was right there with me all the time. My wife is a person who lives very much in the moment. She's not talking, thinking, trying to figure life out. She just did it. So when she would get up, it was like, okay, where are we going? What are we doing? Let's go for a walk. But in the middle of all this, as I'm adapting to life down there and trying to figure out what I'm going to do, her family and I started realizing that she would ask questions, and then a few minutes later, she'd repeat the question. And because she's a very energetic person, we figured, well, she just is not paying attention. It took us quite a while to realize that it was her short-term memory It was just going. Well, and then little things would happen. She'd be cutting up vegetables, and she was very fast, very adept. And suddenly she would cut her finger, which she never did. And so we had to stop and think about, oh, what's going on here? And eventually we kind of realized there's something going on here. There was no history of dementia in her family. And she was young. At that time, she was 58, 59. So this behavior was unusual, but again, because I was dealing with my stuff and she was dealing with hers unknown to us, it's kind of like the fog slipping in. We really didn't notice what was happening. And it took several years. It was Richard to actually get a diagnosis. But at that point, the family, we knew something was wrong. We had a sense that it was dementia. And so the confirmation from the doctor was not a big surprise. It was more like a big, oh, so now what do we do? Because we had no experience with dementia. The behavior was starting to get erratic. We just didn't know what to do. And I was overwhelmed. We never had the conversation, my wife and I, about dementia. We never talked about it. So the only thing looking back that I ever remember her saying was her behavior got out of hand one day. And I realized she didn't know what she was doing, but she was getting angry. And a few minutes later, she asked me, she said, am I a bad person? And I said, no, you're not a bad person. Well, it was as close as we ever got to talking about dementia, and we just went with it. And we had a whole lot of things to sort out, which I'm guessing we'll talk about, but we're basically lost in reaching out for help where we could get it. Most things we were very fortunate. We had some people show up and so.
Yeah. And your situation is unique. You had said to me earlier that you experienced dementia in 2 countries. Can you explain that?
We lived in Mexico for a part of the time. Well, I'm American, she was Mexican. We had family in California. And so when I lost my sight, I was in Mexico. We're in a fairly small town. A lot of conscientious medical questions, but they didn't have a lot of experience in some of this. And as it turned out, it was a dementia. There was not a geriatric doctor in town. Nobody really knew who was a stole. Asking around, I realized that there were cases of people who had dementia, and the families just took care of them. Cool. The family, whoever had dementia for years, was just everybody in the family took care of, and nobody asked anything about it. So we didn't get much help there. And then when this behavior got more dramatic, she would get angry, she would get impulsive, and there was no one there. So we came back to the States. We had professional care, doctors who knew what was going on, and that turned out to be very timely because ultimately we felt to Maureen on medications at the both. Well, the big eye opener for me was that nobody talked about dementia in Mexico. And I was in a smaller town, but they just lived with it. Family took care of it. And when I got here, I realized that we're all the people talking about infants, all. One of the things was dementia has a wide range of symptoms the way it progresses about. In my wife's case, it took years. So when you first hear about it, you think, well, how long is she going to live? Is she going to live for 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, or what? Realized that ultimately you need long-term help. It got to the point where I could not take care of she needed medications and see what was happening. So we had to do something. That long-term care in the United States is just very, very expensive. Cover that or have some way to get access to that. It's really be stressful. Ultimately, we get Maria back to Mexico because we had more resources there involved, more viewable. So I was really struck by how difficult it is for many wonderful families to deal with Alzheimer's, but why they kill them? What wants to do with its system not set up for. We have resources called the
It's interesting. I think you're speaking to, the difference in the cultural approach. You talk about in Mexico, and you were in a small town, but families just took care of their people, their elders, their older generation, and not looking for. I don't know that they were purposely not looking for diagnosis or intervention, but it was just part of maybe multi-generational living in that kind of village community, taking care of folks. And then you juxtapose that with the many places, not all, but many places and communities in the United States where maybe family aren't all located in the same vicinity. And so there's fragmented care, but then we have a very entrenched medical model that is about diagnosis and intervention. And so it's interesting that you share that. And it's interesting that you went back to Mexico too, that to get the care you needed personally and for her well-being. Am I encapsulating that correctly, or did I hear something that wasn't there?
It's very true. Well, I realized different communities are different in terms of resources, whatever. Our society generally is fragmented with the reviews, multiple. Or again, our kids, we have 3 kids, and they're spread around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they weren't here most of the time, and understandable, or the lot, some of the things of other who was, I admit I missed that part. I won't say. Blindness is kind of the same, but the other oddity about it is, as a blind person in Mexico, it was just the world's most crazy obstacles. There's no negative with bullies acting or Mexican disabilities. It's a challenge every day to get up and punch. Or my survival there was always more interesting around here, where I could sort of count on curb touch and cars generally stopping if I was in a bus. It's been awesome. But on top of all of that, there's been wonderful people who are still for. I come back to that. It's right out the better side of many people and look for.
Right. I wonder if our other authors, Scott and Frank, can relate about other people stepping up. Is that an experience you both have had too, where family, friends, or neighbors, or different folks maybe were there to help support, or is that an area where you maybe were lacking?
Well, I do have an answer to that. I will preface that by saying, early on, I read an article in some magazine. I don't remember what it was, but it said a caregiver needs a team. And it talked about all the people you needed to help you. And it, of course, was focusing on the professional staff. You needed the proper medical attention. You needed attorneys. You needed financial people, all of those things. And I agreed with that. And we had all those things in place, so we didn't have to go looking for that. But I took it one step further. I'm an extremist in some ways. Most people wouldn't say that about me, but I was an extremist in this respect. And I take every person that I come in contact with as a potential or part of my team. And I have found an incredible amount of support, particularly with strangers, people I haven't really known. But of course, all of the normal friends have been great. But we have had a tremendous amount of support, and living in a community now, a retirement community. I mean, we can't step outside the door without running into a conversation about something. And Kate is a celebrity here, and she's the only, I will say this, I don't know another person at her stage of dementia who is out as much as she is, but we're out every day from 3:30 until 6 o'clock. And the staff loves her. They stop by, they talk about her smile. She does have a beautiful smile. They talk about what she's wearing, her shoes. Uh, they just love it. And then if she says something, they just, they really adore that. We have 2 people who come by every afternoon that they're looking desperately for a smile or some verbal response. And 95% of the time, they don't get it. But that 5%, when they do, they're excited. And I'll run into people and they'll say, "Oh, I saw Kate today, and she gave me a smile, or she said something." It's amazing the support we get. But it started in a different way because we weren't telling anybody. So we weren't public about what was going on at all. But one of the decisions we made about enjoying life and each other, we always enjoyed eating out. So we didn't cook at home. We gave up. We ate all meals out, except for breakfast. I did my usual breakfast. For Sarah, we often we started every day, go to Panera for her to get a blueberry muffin. We'd take our laptops, she'd take an iPad, and we'd work there for an hour and a half or so. And then it was time for lunch. We'd go to a restaurant for lunch. And then we'd come home, she'd take a little nap. At 3:30, we'd go to Barnes & Noble Cafe where we have something to drink and maybe a little nibble of something. We'd go directly to dinner at another restaurant, and we had a restaurant for every day and every time of the week. And so the staff knew us, and they gave her a lot of attention. They gave me a lot of attention, and we live in a town that it's respectable small town. I mean, the whole area is about 800,000. The city is 150,000. But when you go out, the chances are pretty good you're going to see somebody that you know. So, and those were the kind of things that she could handle. Hey, how are you? Haven't seen you in a long time. Well, it's nice to see you. We'll look forward to seeing you again. Those kind of things she could deal with. And so we have never been socially isolated. We have been out and all the time. And we continue that to this day. So talk about support. And did I say, I talk about in my blog occasionally about my caregiver's toolbox. And I think the biggest single general reason we have been successful is that we have a very large toolbox. We have so many different things that help us to get support. The fact that we had all that experience before with our parents, dealing with things, there were lots of things that just continued to help us understand what was going on. The fact that Sarah and I like the same kinds of things, that doesn't happen with all marriages. We love music, and we could go music. We listen to the same music. We loved eating out. We loved the movies. We loved theater. We went to theaters. We just did so many things. And I will tell you one more thing that I think is really critical for us is understanding why we were doing well. I had no idea. We were just having fun. It was like we're on a honeymoon. We're just gonna go out and enjoy ourselves. That's what we. But looking back on it, and I read the Dementia Handbook by Judy Cornish, and it had a powerful influence on me because what she said helped me understand why in the world we were getting along so well. And that is because she talked about rational thought and intuitive thought. And rational thought is what people with dementia lose. They lose that memory, ability to follow recipes, follow any instruction. All those things go out the way. There's no rationality, but they retain their senses. And it's with our senses that we enjoy the world. We don't get a lot of charge out of knowing that George Washington was the first president of the United States, but eating a good burger or hearing a funny joke or seeing a good movie, all those things are fun. And you can do those for a long, long time. Not forever, because some things, by the way, most of a normal person is using both rational and intuitive all the time. But there are some things that Kate lost in this process. Movies went out, for example, because it became hard for her to understand what was going on. The last 2 movies that she loved were the Won't You Be My Neighbor, Mr. Rogers documentary. She liked that, I'm sure, not because she understood the stuff that was going on, but there was fun and laughter, and she sensed that kind of feeling, a good feeling. The other one was a, 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 little stranger, and that was RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she liked that. And she sensed that kind of feeling, a good feeling. The other one was a little stranger, and that was RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. documentary, which we saw, and we saw both of those 4 times in a month. And I think there she could pick up something else about the personality and nature of Ginsburg that touched her in some ways, that she didn't really understand all this stuff, but it touched her. So we've accepted rational loss, and accepting that is a really important thing. And we've just lived our lives, just enjoyed what is. So every afternoon when we enjoy that ice cream, it doesn't matter that it's not the best ice cream or whatever. We're going down and having fun. We enjoy the people that come back, etc. I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. What about you, Scott?
I think you'd asked about just really our network of people. Was that the
Sure.
initial
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I facilitate 2 different caregiver support groups. I facilitate one locally in the Portland, Oregon region, and I also facilitate a men's national one where each of them, it's their spouse that has frontotemporal dementia. We talk through a lot of the challenges. Oftentimes in a men's national group, they can open up a little bit better, if you will, than in a mixed group. And so I'm privileged to facilitate both of those. But we talk a lot about building your network, and that is easier sometimes said than done. We talk a lot about the 3 Ds, the desertion, the denial, and the diagnosis. And you will have people that will just leave. Somebody gets dementia and they sort of part because they're not sure what to do. They're not sure how to interact. They're worried that their visits will make it worse somehow. And you have people that are in denial. Oh, they're really not, they don't have dementia, or they have something else, or have you tried this special herb, or are you eating more berries in your diet, or whatever it may be. And then you have the armchair sort of diagnosis. Well, I think it's really this. You should be doing this instead. And as such, that creates that distance. And I both experienced that, and then I can sympathize with others that have had that network challenge of bringing people in. But we found that we really, that did happen in all 3 cases. We found that I had to bring people in and say, I need you to come visit with Maureen. I need you to schedule some time this week to come visit her because she's noticing this absence. And I need you to go take her and get her nails done. I need you to go take her out to lunch. I need you, not that those aren't things that I'm doing, but she's only seeing me. She had 2 children from a prior marriage. They would come by every once in a while, maybe every 6 to 8 weeks, but not a lot either. And they had their own lives, and I respected that. But it is difficult to get people to suspend life and come and engage. And that's just sort of a constant thing that we had to work through. You introduce new people into your world as this happens as well. I cared for Maureen for the first 2.5 years at home, and the last year of her life was in a care facility. Fortunately, it was only 10 minutes away, but I still saw her every day, 2 or 3 times a day, and either I would take over the care where whatever they were in the middle of, changing her or showering her or whatever. Or if she wasn't in the middle of something, I'd take her out. I'd take her out to Starbucks or park, go listen to music, whatever it might be. Go smell the flowers. She loved to do that. And so finding ways to still engage her, even though I had to place her in a care facility. And so you get introduced to all these different med aides and psych nurses and caregivers, and most are trained in Alzheimer's. Very few have ever even heard about frontotemporal dementia. And it is a very different thing. It is very different than Alzheimer's. They don't have a memory problem, they have a processing problem. And so when you sit somebody down at a dinner table to eat, they're most likely not going to eat if they've got FTD. They'll just kind of stare at it for a while and then get up and walk away because they can't process the whole using a fork, drinking from a cup kind of thing. And got to a point where I'd hand her a cup with a straw in it. Sometimes she would bite the straw. Sometimes she would kiss the straw. Sometimes she'd just stick her tongue in the straw. And then sometimes she would drink from the straw. And what I found was, rather than taking that away from her, I give her something else. So she dropped the drink and then sort of have a reset. And 30 seconds later, I'd try having her drink again, and then maybe then she would use it correctly. But finding a way to kind of help reset without taking that away, because she also had the primary progressive aphasia version of FTD, which took away a lot of her words. And so it was hard for her to verbalize what she wanted. She would use a phrase like, there, that will be. And you don't know what to do with that. And so what she's looking for the affirmative. She's looking for the affirmation. So she would say something like, there, that will be. My response needed to be, it will be, huh? And she'd go, yeah. And so that she felt heard. She felt understood, even though I didn't know specifically what she was looking for. I would look more for the physical cues. When she wrung her hands, I knew she had to go to the bathroom. She picked at her arm, I knew that she was cold. I'd get her a jacket. Fortunately, my wife, whenever she got too hot, her cheeks had always turned flushed since the day I met her. So that was easy for me to tell she was too hot. But, she couldn't say she was hungry. She couldn't say she was thirsty. She couldn't do those things. And so sometimes I would just redirect in a fashion that would actually just say, hey, let's get something to eat. And she'd nod, and then she'd let me lead her to where it could get something to eat. Maybe it was away from the care facility. Oftentimes it was. But her senses were a little bit different in that, for instance, FTD doesn't take away your eyesight, but it takes away your ability to use your eyes and interpret the information from your eyes. So she got to a point where her head went down. She had no peripheral vision. Not that she didn't have it. Her brain wasn't telling her eyes to look this way or to interpret the data from there. So in her world, in the way that her world she created, it was all very much in front of her. And she did start to hang her head down a lot. And I didn't want to startle her when I'd come up to her. So when I would come into a room and I'd see her, I announced myself in a way that I knew nobody else in the building would announce themselves. I'd come into a room and I go, Tim, and she associated that with me, and her head would look up and then she'd look right at me, straight at me. And that was our connection right there. And then she'd smile and I could give her a hug and all was good. But if you came up to her from the side, it startled her, it made her anxious. And so it's all these sort of adjustments that you make. Same thing with the taste and I went in and there was a caregiver that said, I think we have a problem. And I said, what is that? And she said, Maureen, I was feeding Maureen and she looked at me and she said, murder. And I said, pardon? She goes, murder. And I said, what were you feeding her? And she said, well, there was broccoli. And I said, oh, yeah, she's not a big fan of broccoli. I said, what she does now, because she can't grab the right word, is she just categorizes words as no or positive and negative. And so when she didn't want the broccoli, she just grabbed the first negative word she could and threw it out there. So I said, no, she's not looking to do you in. This is just she grabbed a negative word. I don't want the broccoli. And I said, that's just kind of where she's at right now. The words don't necessarily align with what she's thinking, but emotionally they do. And that was getting back to the networking and so forth, is these caregivers all had to sort of be trained on how do I interact with this person with FTD? Because so many of them are trained on Alzheimer's and not FTD. And I'd get caregivers trained. I'd give them write-ups. I'd explain things. And then they would have a turnover and somebody would leave and somebody else would come back in and I'm training that new person. And so I was happy to do that because, if they're in a care facility, you are, as the spouse, the greatest advocate. And so, yeah, that was kind of an ongoing lesson.
Wow, that's fascinating. And, just kudos to you for figuring all of this out. And I think it's really, really, you must be such an asset to this group that you run, and people need this so much. So that's great. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks. I wanted to ask Stephen and Frank about their pseudonyms, because they've both written and shared their stories using another name, and in Frank's case, also for his wife. So, Frank, do you want to explain that?
I'd be glad to do it. And I will say to start with, I wish I hadn't done it to start with because it leads to too many situations like this one when you ask me, well, which name do you want to use? for this. And I said, well, we've been using Richard a lot for this. So I think I just feel consistency leads me to just have you call me Richard. But I'm open with everybody what my real name is. And of course, I'm around everybody that I see physically. I mean, everybody knows me as Frank. And in fact, by the way, on Facebook, I operate as Frank, and I actually put some of my blog posts on Facebook, and I translate the name sometimes so that they've got my name. And if I don't, I put my name there and say, that's you'll see Richard Creighton, and that's who I am. But that's just the name I use for the blog. And I did it for all the places too. The city, I use Nashville as where we live. We actually live in Columbia, South Carolina. I use it for all the restaurants that we go to, for all the other people's names. I've got an Excel spreadsheet with all these things that indicate what I couldn't always remember. So I'd have to go back and check to see who is who. And I really wish that I hadn't done it to start with. And I did it really because of Kate's interest in privacy at the outset. And I felt better about not revealing it. That is, now looking back, I think, I think even she would be really proud that she was out there as Sarah, and let her changed all the names.
And what about you, Stephen? Also known as Tio.
It's simply my nickname in Spanish. I'm Mexican and English-speaking family, American. And so Maria and I spent a chunk of time changing diapers for our identical girl triplets, our nieces. And I was always Uncle Steve to them, Tio Stib. And by the time I started writing, which I didn't really get into after I lost my sight because I needed another way to give my mind something to do, it just happened. And so I hung on to it. And they still call me Uncle Steve, Tio Stib, because I speak Spanish with a bunch of people in my family and English with others. So that's all.
Okay. Yeah, I find that interesting because, I think we touched on the fact that for many people and for society in general, there is a large stigma attached to a dementia diagnosis. So there are people who kind of want to shield themselves from that by using a pseudonym, So I think that's pretty interesting. Does anybody have any questions from the our audience here?
Oh, Mark. Yeah, Mark. Nice to see you, Mark.
It's been very interesting. Thanks to all of you. I feel like I need a second name now, though. But anyway, Scott, you said that you had difficulty getting others engaged, I believe is what you said. But Richard Frank said that you had really good, your efforts were really good about getting people to help, even before going into a retirement community, even from strangers sometimes. And I was just wondering how you did that, because I did not have that same experience.
Well, it's interesting. It's first of all, I would say involves partially my own personality and things that I did that made that possible. Some of it is beyond anything that I've done. I've had any number of times. Well, for example, there's a couple I see at a restaurant that Kate, Sarah, and I used to go to every Sunday. I still go there by myself. And I see this couple. They're not there as often as I am. When they see me, they always sit with me. Or if they're ahead of time, they want me to sit with them. And we didn't know them, but one day I was ready to pay the server for our bill. And she said, it's been taken care of for you. And I thought, because we are such good customers, that the restaurant was giving me a meal. And I said, well, thank you. She said, oh, no, we're not doing that. And I said, well, who's taking care of it? And she said, oh, the couple over there. And I looked over there, and it's a couple I had seen, but never really paid much attention to. I didn't know them. And so as we left, we introduced ourselves to them and said hello. That would have been, I would say, at least 7 years ago. And they are still buying my meal to this day. Of when I go, I have convinced them to let me periodically pay for their meal. So we've at least achieved that. Most of the time they do that. And they have a daughter who's been very successful in her business. And they will say, no, Maria says we should take care of this. But they saw that I was caring for her. And they cared about that, and it just made an impression. There was another time in a restaurant. It was a small Mexican restaurant, just a hole-in-the-wall restaurant, but one we went to regularly. And we got there early at 5 o'clock, and there was only one other couple there, and it was a couple, a woman who appeared to be Asian of about 25 or so, and an African-American who was probably 30 or so, a little bit older. They were just sitting in a booth across the way. And they finished before we did, since they'd arrived before. And they walked by our table when they were leaving. And they said, have a good night. And I said, and to you too. And they left and went. And then when it came time to pay the check, that was the server told me, your check has been taken care of. I said, hi. And she said, couple sitting over there. Well, it was nothing I did at all. But they just did that. And we've had other situations like that where people have seen us and they just felt like they wanted to do something nice. So that's one thing. But one of the things when I talked about my team, one of the things I like about the concept, at least the way I've used it, it doesn't require anybody to do anything special, like buying a meal or giving us flowers or whatever. It's only being nice. It's a checkout person at a grocery store who's been very nice. I mean, oh, thank you very much. It just that little moment brightens my day. It doesn't have to have anything to do with dementia or anything else. But they now I'm more of an extrovert. I like being with people, and so I'm bolstered when I get responses like that. And I find that it just happens all over the place. And as you suggest, Mark, where we live right now, we are just inundated with all sorts of things. It's incomparable. I can't say that I wish we'd moved here earlier, because I think we lived in our home as long as we could, and we enjoyed every bit there, and I don't have any regret there. But I will say that particularly at this stage of her Alzheimer's, I could not have a better support network than we've got. It's impossible. Plus, I'm still going out to some of those restaurants each week on my own for lunch and get all the other stuff too.
Thank you so much. We have Cliff. You've got a question, so go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yes, this question is directed to Scott. My wife has a very rare form of Alzheimer's, logopedic Alzheimer's, with extremely severe primary progressive aphasia. Initially, the differential diagnosis was between semantic FTD and logopedic Alzheimer's, but she is 76, and I knew right away that she was way too old probably for FTD. Right now, basically, she has just one word that she knows. It's a word for blood pressure medicine, ibuprofen. That's really essentially the only word. When she gets upset, she will sometimes say doot, 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 and that is it. I was wondering if you could have any suggestions on how I could inform caregivers, because this is a very rare type of Alzheimer's. It's almost analogous to the type of situation you were in dealing with FTD and caregivers.
Oh, thank you, Cliff. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that she's too old for FTD, but in all likelihood, at 76, there's a bit of a crossover, a little bit of Alzheimer's, a little bit of FTD. I mean, as all brain disease is progressive, if you will, and it starts to affect other parts of the brain. So it's likely it may have onset in one way and developed into another as well. So I'm sorry to hear that for your wife. Yeah, Maureen had the PPA and the semantic variant, and it does hit people differently. I mean, we've all, Bruce Willis is struggling with FTD PPA. My understanding is most recently that he's now completely nonverbal. And there were many days where my wife didn't say 3 words all day. And then something would just happen and the neurons would align and she had a story to tell me. And I loved those moments. I was able to record a couple of those. Didn't make a darn bit of sense, but I just loved it because she was telling me a story and I'm just there for it and attentive. And it may be 5 minutes long. And I'm just thinking, wow, this is the most she's talked in a month. And there were characters and happiness and joy and sarcasm I hadn't seen in a year. And I mean, it was just, she was telling me this story and I'm just taking it all for all that it's worth. But then the next day, not 3 words. And so again, you have to meet them in the moment, meet them where they're at and accept that. So for caregivers, in terms of educating them and saying, okay, this is what you need to do. Before she was checked into the care facility, I gave them pages of write-up and I gave them FTD materials. I'm an Association for FTD ambassador. And so I have access to a lot of materials. I was giving that to them, trying to explain to them. But I also respect that these people are overworked, underpaid, typically understaffed. And so there's not a lot that they can do to sort of take a break and educate themselves on that particular dementia, whatever it may be. And so my best advice to them was, I said, treat them with a level of dignity, be inquisitive from the standpoint of not necessarily getting a response from them, but by trying things with them. She wasn't going to be able to use words. So you need to try something. And if you're giving her something to eat or giving her something to drink or taking her to another room, she's either going to go along with that or take that or receive that, or she's not. And when she doesn't receive it, don't think she's being obstinate. Just think that, okay, this is where she's at because she can't explain herself. And so it was, as I mentioned before, it's taking a lot of the body language. It's trying to kind of understand routine helps a lot because she's going to let you know if something doesn't feel right within the routine. But it is a lot about, yes, reading the body language and understanding. And that's hard when you have turnover of staff. Now they have to kind of learn it, a different person has to learn it again, and I'm there helping them. But they were going to kick her out because she swung at one of the caregivers. Now my wife was about 90 pounds soaking wet. She was, I felt like wanting to hurt anybody, but I said, well, tell me the context. She was going to hit somebody. Why was that? Well, they were undressing her to dress her, undressing, getting her out of pajamas. And I watched them do that. And I said, well, time out. Would you want to be undressed now? Would you want someone to suddenly groan in and start pulling your shirt off? No, of course not. I said, you have to treat her with the same level of dignity as you expect somebody without dementia. And then she's going to be much more receptive of that treatment because, I would, even though she couldn't talk to me, I could talk to her and say, honey, I'm going to put you in this nice top. I'd show her the nice top. I say, we got to take your pajama top off first. Okay. So I'm going to help you with that. Okay. We're going to do that. And yeah, does it take and make that step process longer? Yes. You can't be on a schedule with somebody with dementia because they don't process at the same speed that you do. And so it's really going through that pace. And as an example, oftentimes with Alzheimer's, not always, but oftentimes with Alzheimer's is an older woman will kind of revert back to when they were maybe a young mom. And so this facility had, about a dozen dolls. So if somebody asked for their baby, they would give them a doll and it kind of made them feel better. It kind of, embraced that nurturing aspect. And so my wife went to one of the staff and asked, where's my baby? And those are the only 3 words she used that day. Where's my baby? That was it. That's all she could say. Where's my baby? And so they took her into this room of the dolls and they handed her one doll that had very matted hair, was actually not quite an attractive doll. And she kind of handed the doll to my wife. My wife looked at it and threw it down, running out of the room. So she found a med aid on the floor that she recognized. And she went over to her and she said, "Where's my baby?" She doesn't know. She looks at the staff person. The staff person says, "Hey, I tried to give her a doll. She wouldn't, she wasn't interested." And it was at that time I came in. It was around lunchtime I came in and I did my ta-da. And she looked up and she goes, "My baby." And over there. So because she couldn't explain, "I'm looking for my husband," or "I'm looking for Scott. Where's my baby?" And so they were thinking, because they're trained in Alzheimer's, "Oh, she's reverting. She needs a doll." So anyway, but unfortunately, I can't give you a trick that will work today in a month from now, because it is progressive. It does deteriorate. And so whatever you figure out one day, the next week is going to be very different.
Yeah, I got her a device called Lingraphica, but she can't use that anymore. So
No, because it's progressive and it deteriorates. Yeah, I tried shapes and you kind of word association, and it works until it doesn't. We went through 4 different phone iterations where she wasn't taking the smartphone with her. She wasn't figuring it out anymore. So I went back to a flip phone that was more familiar. Well, it works until it doesn't.
Yeah.
Then I got a landline thinking the landline is very familiar. Well, that works until it doesn't. She doesn't hang up. I say, "Bye, babe," and she doesn't hang up. And so I couldn't call her then again. And so what I did is I got a security camera with a 2-way speaker. Then she doesn't have to press a button or hang anything up or anything like that. And I could just say, "Hi, sweetie, it's Scott." She'd well, and like hear it, and she'd like walk up to the speaker and say, "Hi, I'm going to be home real soon. Just want to make sure you're okay." And she goes, "Yeah." And so there was that conversation. So,
you know about Lingraphica? You know what that is? Well, thank you very much for your insights.
yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you, Cliff. Great question from Flori Munyat. If you can you tell us the greatest learning or takeaway you've experienced during your caregiving? So maybe each of you, just like what's your biggest learning?
I'll tell you, I'm going to repeat something that I said earlier. Not everybody was on at that time. And that is the most important thing I learned was the distinction between rational and intuitive thought. And it structures everything that I do with Sarah. And a caregiver needs to retain both. You really need to have that rational thought. I'm listening to what Scott said. Scott, I just share so much of your thinking, even though in my case, we're not talking about FTD, but so many of the things you've said applies in our own situation. And I have a general term that I think is really important, and that's LOVE, love. I think in my caregiver's toolbox, I think the single most important tool I have is loving Sarah, Kate. It leads to creative thinking. When you love somebody, and I think back to when we were dating, and I won't go into all the things we did, but I mean, I did all sorts of things to make her like me. And it just was, it like never stopped. And you could think of all sorts of things. And I think during this time with Sarah, during this journey, it's made me think of things. I'm thinking like very early on, she had a panic attack. She'd never had a panic attack before at all. Our marriage had never seen a panic attack before, but I had rushed her because I'm very punctual. She is not. And we were going to a symphony concert and we were about to be late. And I was trying to get her to hurry up. And it caused a panic attack. And so I tried to calm her, but I couldn't get her calm before we got in the car. But we got in the car, I remembered the Brahms Violin Concerto, second movement. And I turned on that movement. It's about 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And I turned on that, and before it was over, she was calm. Most of our use of music was for entertainment, sheer entertainment, but some of it is clearly therapeutic. And that was my first instance of therapeutic. And it's just something that came to me. I wanted to help her, and I was just looking for things, and it led me to do that, knowing we both love music. Another time, she had awakened from a nap, sitting on the sofa in our family room. And when she woke up from a nap, she was really kind of confused and frightened and It wasn't a panic attack, but really uneasy. And so I went over to her and sat down with her. And again, I tried to calm her, and it seemed like it was helping, but not enough. And I don't know why, but again, I'm dying to calm her. And I thought about a children's song, and I can't remember what children's song I sang, but I started singing a children's song to her, and she seemed to like that. And as a result, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and I did a search on children's songs, and I downloaded an album of 100 children's songs. And for the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes, we sang together. We sang, and that was the time when she could sing. She had speech. And she just felt fine. And we just had a good time. Even to this day, I sing Edelweiss to her in the middle of the night if she has something that is disturbing her in some way. I sing Edelweiss to her, and I've got an album that has Edelweiss on it, and I'll set it. It operates from my phone as a Wi-Fi system, and I'll set it to repeat repeatedly, and it'll just play that, and she'll just soothe her. But love, I think, is really a critical variable in this whole thing, and she appreciates it. She feels love. Every morning when I go into the bedroom and discover looks like she might be waking up, I go in and I rub the top of her head, and I sing to her. The music is Beautiful Brown Eyes, but I sing Beautiful, Beautiful Sarah. Beautiful, beautiful Sarah Lee. That Lee is her middle name. Beautiful, beautiful Sarah. I love you. And
It's beautiful.
And every night, I have a similar routine every night. I thank her, and I say, I'll bet you know why I'm thanking you. And she smiles. She smiles because she can't remember something is happening. And I say, I want to thank you for a very nice day. And every day I spend with you is a nice day. And we've been married 61 years. That's thousands of days that we have spent together, thousands of days. And everyone has been a nice thing.
Thank you, Frank. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Look back there.
Stephen, you want to go? Or?
Sure. What have I learned? What has been most important to get through the journey? Patience or one resistance. It took me a long time to stop arguing or pretending or resisting my wife's somewhat strange desires at times. She would suddenly say she wanted to go see her mom. And my original thought was, well, we can't go see her mom. She's several thousand miles away in Mexico. Well, but she didn't want to hear that. And ultimately, it became obvious, pragmatic, that I just said, sure, let's go see her mom. Well, put on her coat, she'd walk outside, and within 3 minutes, she'd lost that thought. And that was the big lesson, was just don't resist. She said she wanted to do something, you say, sure, go do it, because moments later, she'll be somewhere else. And the second big one was learning to be patient and accepting with family, because each member of the family had a different idea about what dementia was and what it meant to them, and they were all grieving in their own way, challenged. And there were times that created a lot of friction because we were all stressed out. It was easy to get mad. And the biggest one, we haven't really shared much about this, was one part of my wife's journey was she got extremely physical and violent at times. Won't you just, it was totally out of character. She'd never been that. Ultimately, we had to give her medications because without them, she would scream for hours, and it was driving caregivers away. And the challenge was that our daughter was totally set against giving her mother medications because she was sure those medications were going to kill her mom. I appreciated that, but it was very difficult to get through that. And then the whole medication thing, obviously people have that experience. There's not one drug that suddenly makes it better or calms them down. Yeah, people through all these experience, whole conditions were changing. So ultimately, all the family had to learn to love each other in different ways because we were presented with the challenge and saying we loved some patients on the
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and I think just again, FTD is oftentimes young onset dementia. And so we're engaged in a very active life. I mean, I'm still working. And so the biggest takeaway for me was take the things that are I'm driven by and remove those from the equation. One of the biggest things is schedule. So do not place your dementia loved one on a schedule because that will only frustrate you because that schedule will never be met. And so take that just out of the equation. If you think you're going to do 6 things with your loved one, plan on 2, in that same time frame. Give yourself 6 hours to do the thing that normally would be 2 hours. It just takes schedule out of the equation. My wife loved the Pacific Ocean, loved the Oregon coast. And I wanted to try and take her there knowing that she struggled. And this was when she was bound in a wheelchair in her last 4 months. She was so weak, she was in a wheelchair. I go to the Oregon coast. I check in for the room. I find her own one with a nice panoramic view in case she can't or doesn't want to go outside, she can see the view. I check in on a Wednesday night, and it's about an hour and a half from where we live and where care facility is. Thursday morning, I go get her, and I bring her back. And then check out Friday morning, or I mean, not check out, excuse me. I take her home Friday whenever she's ready. And then I go back Friday night and I check out Saturday morning. So because I knew that confined places agitated her, I knew that schedules weren't something that she was going to be able to sit on. So what I did is I checked in a day before she was there and I checked out the day after she was there. And so she was on no schedule and she wasn't in some lobby where she didn't understand people and there was a confined area or that kind of thing. You take those things out of the equation so that you can simply just enjoy that moment with them. You don't have to sweat the small stuff. You get rid of the small stuff. And I think that was huge for us. That was a big learning, a big takeaway for me is don't put her on a schedule at all. Just, eliminate that from your time together because it makes it that much richer. You're not worrying about the schedule, you're worrying about the important thing. As Frank said, it's the love that you have, the relationship that you have, because schedule will just beat us down if we let it. So we just take schedule out of the equation.
That's so wise. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And so we've gone over time. So thank you everybody for your patience and sticking around. I think we could go another hour, but we unfortunately have to limit our time here. So I want to thank you all for attending Caring for a Wife with Alzheimer's or Dementia. Our next All's Authors Live presentation is in November, which is Caregiver Appreciation Month. And we will be discussing caring for 2 parents with dementia at the same time. Well, Christy will be one of our speakers for that. Please check your inbox each week for news from All's Authors introducing our newest author, podcasts, special events, and more. And visit our blog podcast at allsauthors.com. We are a 501(c)(3) organization supported by donations only. So if you'd like to contribute to our mission to provide quality resources for dementia caregivers, please visit allsauthors.com/donate. You can find us on social media at Facebook, X, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey daily. So please follow us there. And remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. It was really eye-opening and very beautiful. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Marianne with exciting news. Alz Authors has published a brand new anthology, Poetry for the Dementia Journey, now available in ebook and paperback through Amazon. Within its pages, you'll discover a variety of voices writing about the diversity of dementia care experiences, caring for a mother or father or spouse, witnessing the decline of a sibling, reflections on the time before the diagnosis, the years of care, and the aftermath. Poetry provides us with a meaningful way to explore our experience and emotions regarding dementia and to express ourselves when we encounter the many different joys and dilemmas caregiving can bring. You'll find details on how to order the book in the show notes. Please remember to leave a review on the book sales page once you've read it. Reviews do help boost a book's visibility and helps readers find it. Thank you for your support of our efforts to erase the silence and stigma that often accompany a dementia diagnosis.
Caregiving is a challenge, whether your person has dementia or not. Finding helpful tips and learning new strategies from people in the know is critical. That's why we at Alz Authors love the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast from Elizabeth Miller, who also happens to be an Alz author. Elizabeth speaks from experience and has important and often fun conversations with other caregiving experts and professionals. And we appreciate learning tips on self-care, discovering new resources, and feeling empowered to support ourselves as caregivers. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcasts, or visit the website happyhealthycaregiver.com.